Brother Manzoor has been a member of social justice movements for over 20 years. In 2004, he launched a grassroots social justice TV show called Independent Voices that ran for 5 years and was broadcasted from 70 public access TV stations across the country. He went on to found Muslims for Social Justice in 2014 and a network called Movement to End Racism and Islamophobia, better known as MERI, in 2005. Manzoor is the recipient of the 2014 International Human Rights Award awarded by the Human Rights Coalition of North Carolina and the 2016 Self-Determination Award by Black Workers for Justice. He has done work on social justice and was covered in the local, national, and international media. Without further ado, I'll give you Mr.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Brother Muhammadu, and thank you so much to North Raleigh Masjid for giving me this opportunity. It's a great honor to be here. Great to see so many familiar faces as well as new faces, at least for me. And this is the whole purpose of these kind of gatherings and social justice. So I know and I'm going to respect there will be adhan at I think 8 o'clock. So what I will do, I'll try to do my presentation and inshallah I'll stay after the adhan so you can ask me questions. But also after Isha prayer, I'll be inshallah available. So this presentation is simply called Islam and Social Justice, and Brother Muhammad already gave my introduction. So I will basically start with this hadith. And recently, Brother Walid in khutbah also, recited that hadith from Muslim in his Sahih that whoever among you sees an evil action, let him change it with his hand by taking an action. If he cannot, with his tongue by speaking out, or if he cannot, then with his heart by at least hearting it and believing that it's wrong. And that is the weakest of the faith. And I think this is a very important hadith that basically urges us or emphasizes the need to have a social justice response to injustices that we see around us. But I think if you think very carefully about it, and it really shows about real life. In real life, there will be situations there where we will see injustice and we can actually stop it. But then there are many places we cannot, and this is what Brother Walid was also discussing in his khutbah. That not every time we may have power. Some people may be urged, mashallah, that's good. But at least we say something about it. But if we are even afraid, and I was in a job situation where if you argue too much and then they also take actions against you, at least say something in your heart. But if you don't even do anything, speak out against injustice in your heart, then actually you have no faith left. And this is what was emphasized with Brother Walid. And when I think about the weakest of the faith in the heart, what can we do if we see injustice, One of the ways in this country at least, and many, is the voting, right? Not necessarily that's the only way, maybe giving money to a cause, that is doing social justice, let's say, or standing up for justice. It could be Muslim community that is trying to, establish community and fighting for justice. Giving sympathy, supporting people who are going through hardships. So there are many ways we can still at least retain our, weakness of faith, but by our emphasis or our hope and prayer is that we are not at the weakest of the faith, but we are a little stronger at the faith. And from this point of view, I just made this, slide, and I was talking to a lot of folks too about social justice, and Brother Hidayat gave me a very important lesson, which I remember. I came in 2000 to United States as a graduate student at NC State University, and if you can imagine, soon after 9/11, for many immigrant Muslims, the world turned upside down. All of a sudden, the Muslims were become terrorists, and it seemed demonizing. And at that time, there were a lot of conversation in the Muslim community, and many Muslims said, there are three choices. That one, we should leave the country, it's really against Muslim and Islam. The other choice was, no, let's stay here, but give up everything about Islam. Women not cover their head, and men change their name, or any way we can assimilate. And the third choice was, no, we're gonna stay here. We're gonna stay here as Muslims, and we're gonna, work in the social justice movement. We're gonna educate Americans about Islam and Muslims, and that's where majority of stayed. But I also want to say leaving the country is not even an option for many people who are born and raised here or African American Muslims. And also the other thing that people emphasize, I'm an immigrant Muslim. As an immigrant Muslim, actually I have more rights in some ways in this country than in many Muslim countries too. Despite all the issues that I'm going to talk about in depressing situation, I as an immigrant Muslim can own a property here. I can start a newspaper, or I can be quoted by the media. I can support a political movement and a campaign. I can even run for election, not for president. For that you have to be born American, but for many other elections. But these choices are not even available in many Muslim countries. So I think it's very important that as we're talking about all the injustices in this country, we also recognize that there are many opportunities here to bring a change, and we should, inshallah, think about that. So I'm going to now focus on some of the examples of Islamophobia in the USA. And soon after 9/11, one thing happened after the 9/11, attack. Negative media depictions of Muslims on TV, on movies. There were a lot of movies. Some won Oscar awards that demonized Muslims. TV shows, 24, Homeland, many shows. Newspaper coverage, and basically demonized Muslims. And the USA has done that throughout history. Before they want to attack a country or a people, that they first do is to dehumanize them, saying Muslims are barbarians. 9/11 happened, something was going wrong with their religion, and then hate attacks started happening against Muslims very soon, or people who resembled Muslims. Actually, some of the people, the biggest number of people who murdered after 9/11, Sikh community member who wear turban, and people think they're Muslim. They're not Muslim, but that, the ignorance of the country for many people. Wars and occupation, of course, Afghanistan war and Iraq war and the drone attacks, and many wars happened, which have cost lives of millions of people. Just Iraq war, actually there are estimates more than 1 million to 2 million people have died. Not just war, but the situation after the war. Because if you destroy a country, its infrastructure, its political, illegal, and other, then you create more chaos and anarchy and violence. Muslim registry is something I don't know if people remember, but in 2000, 2001, we have to go to, at that time it was INS. It was not Homeland Security, but INS, Immigration Nationalization Service office in Charlotte, to register as a Muslim. And if you remember, this Muslim registry is resembled Nazi era Germany, where they had to ask Jews to wear a label or register that you're a Jew and you live in a community. So this is the level of abuse was happening and it was legal. But if many people living in Raleigh in 2008, the largest newspaper is called News and Observer, which is more than 100-year-old, which has its own role in white supremacy in 1898. But they circulated 2 DVDs against Muslims, twice the same DVD. It's called Engage Jihad. And you can't even imagine, this is a very now respectable newspaper, that it will spread such blatant hatred against Muslims. They will never dare to do something like the Jewish community or the African American community. But they easily, circulated, and that was just before the election. That's another thing I'm gonna focus here, that soon before election, you're gonna see a lot of spike in Islamophobia, rhetoric of Islamophobia, the narrative of Islamophobia. Scaremongering over Ground Zero Mosque and Sharia law in 2012. Again, another election. And if you remember, Ground Zero Mosque was not even a mosque, not built on Ground Zero, but it was demonized and people got elected locally in North Carolina, just running on the campaign of Ground Zero Mosque, which has nothing to do with North Carolina. Sharia law, again, another thing that has been created as a scaremongering tactic. The Muslim want to establish Sharia law on everybody, and they're gonna cut off hands and force every woman to wear hijab. And then this is how they demonize. They first of all don't even know what Sharia is and what is the interpretation and everything. But North Carolina passed anti-Sharia law. I don't know if people know. 2013, our city General Assembly passed anti-Sharia law. So this is the level of misinformation, ignorance, and both Democrat and Republican supported it. Majority Republican, but both sides. So, and then of course, our 3 winners. Everybody knows huge tragedy in 2015, which is an outcome of Islamophobia. When you're gonna create hatred, and Islamophobia, we have to understand, it's not a phobia, it's not a fear, it's hatred. It's hatred against Islam and Muslims, and that is stemming from our policies, the use-own policies, and media depictions that then lead to interpersonal violence and policies. election of Trump, again, I don't support any party, but that he played a lot of role in, stirring up hatred against Muslim and Muslim ban. So these are some of the examples of how Islamophobia took place. But I again want to ask, if people think, why are they attacking us so much? Why the Muslims are so constantly being attacked? For the last now 20 years since 9/11, we are only 1 or 2% of the population. Muslims are not really a threat to the country. Actually, FBI says that majority of the extremists or so-called terrorist actions are not by Muslims, they are white supremacists. Then why are Muslims being attacked constantly, right? The reason is that they are attacking the same thing for racism, same thing anti-immigrant, anti-refugee bigotry, because they use these attacks to ascend to power. The powerful elite will always try to demonize a minority to come to power. And many African Americans here will know that this is a historic textbook example of how racist powers have basically destroyed the power of the black people by working class, they turn working class white people against the black people. Same thing against Muslims. And this is actually Brother Hatim Bazian in UC Berkeley, and he has given a definition of Islamophobia, that it's a contrived fear or a perceived threat. In other words, it's a fictitious threat, Islamophobia, against Muslims and people perceived as Muslim. Their objective is to maintain and extend socio-economic, political, and cultural disparities. And how does that happen? That happens through elections. Every time you need a target, and if you are quiet, if you are submissive, they're going to use it again and again against you. Unless you speak up, organize, then they're going to say, okay, this is not an easy target, so let's find a new, easier target. They will always find a newer target that's easy. Similarly, why does USA go to war around the world, right? Muslims are not really a threat in a way, the way they are poor, but it's mostly about resources. It's about oil. It's about domination of U.S. economy. If certain countries are, changing their economy or want to change from dollar to euro, maybe, and so it's a bigger socio-economic and political, balance of power that's maintained by United States. In more than 200 years of U.S. history, USA has been at some sort of war for entire history except for 4 years. There are some statistics about that. The U.S. in direct and indirect wars. So one is when we send forces, other is when we support oppressive forces. There's another example I'll give you about anti-Sharia law. There are more than 100 anti-Sharia laws introduced in just 2 years, between 2011 and 2013. And guess what? 80% of those laws were introduced by same legislators who also introduced voter suppression law, right to work or anti-union laws, and anti-immigrant laws. In North Carolina specifically, the legislators who passed anti-Sharia law also gave tax breaks to the rich people, also defunded our employment program, also stopped Medicare expansion. So if you look at that, Muslims are just a convenient target. The bigger objective is distribution of power, distribution of wealth. And for that, you need an easy target through which you're going to accomplish that bigger goal. And then the question also comes, why are Muslims uniquely oppressed? Is it only happening against Muslims? Of course not. And I'm going to now show some slides of bigger oppressions happening. One of the biggest oppressions, I was just talking to a brother here, that Brother Pharaoh is active against prison industrial complex. The United States had the highest incarceration rate in the world. And this is very shocking because we are the most developed country in the world, highest GDP, highest accumulation of wealth. And how come USA has one of the highest? And it's because USA incarcerate black people predominantly since the slavery. And there's a very good documentary I highly recommend. It's called 13th. It's 13th U.S. Amendment. We said slavery has ended, but if a person commits a crime, then they can be used literally as a slave. It's in the U.S. Constitutional Amendment. And what they basically target was black people because after slavery they're gonna lose free labor. So let's put them into prisons and use them as a cheap labor. And then this is, if you look at the graph even, this is what United States look like if you compare just with the developed world. Because United States, other countries like Russia, we always blame them, or Cuba or stuff. But let's compare USA with the developed countries. We are a developed country from Western democracy. This is how much, this is not a population, this is a rate, which is out of 100,000 population, 698 people are incarcerated, put in jails or prisons in the United States. And you can see the rest of the countries, which are much lower. And this is the real reason. 1 out of 3 black men will be incarcerated in their lifetime, compared to 1 out of 17 white men. And this is how you're gonna see. When we say racism, racism is not simply whether you like or dislike a black person. Racism is institutional system, it's systemic system, and it is happening against Muslims too. In France, Muslims are 10 to 12% of the French population, and they're 60% of the French prison population. And this is called colonialism, because in France, most of the Muslims are formerly colonized, North African, Algerian, Moroccan, and they're still treated as second-class humans. They're denied education, healthcare, job opportunities, and mostly pushed into prisons, same as black people in America. There is now one term is called school to prison pipeline. They're police, and they actually, black youth were from very early age, harshly punish them and put them in detention, and they mostly don't graduate and mostly go to prison in the future. And I'm sorry for a lot of graphs, but this is a very important graph also talking about USA inequality and health disparity. If you see US life expectancy, we have the lowest life expectancy in all the rich world. United States, and this is a little bit older, 2014, is ranked 79. All the rest of the developed world is much higher. But I'm going to ask you a question. Do you know what is the life expectancy of black people in this graph? Black African American in this graph. So I will tell you. So black people are not here, they are here. This is the life expectancy of African Americans. And what is happening actually, the white people are actually close to the developed world, but because of the African American being so low, the overall average of US have come down. We have to understand African American 12% of US population. So this is a scandal for a rich country to have one of the worst kind of life, and this is another example of that, and it goes a little bit longer. From 1960, 1970, you can see the life expectancy of the United States started decreasing, right? And the question is why? Before that, actually, USA was comparable to the rich world. All of a sudden, something started happening in 1970. And I don't know if people know what happened in 1970. So this is what happened in 1970. Before 1970, US had an economic system, we got Keynesian economic system, which had a lot more taxes on the rich people, a lot more welfare, strong labor unions, strong distribution of wealth. The largest distribution of wealth in America happens after 1940, when New Deal started, and the highest maximum tax rate on the richest people increased to 90%. Very few people, the billionaire of that time. What it did, it gave at least some middle class in America, and it was still a capitalist country. People call it socialist. It was Franklin Roosevelt, as a capitalist president. But through working class people. But if you see in this graph, actually, since 1970, the income of the top 5%, which is 95th percentile, has increased. But the income of 20th percentile or median has stayed almost the same. And if you go to 1%, actually, it is exponentially high. So what is happening is the inequality has dramatically increased in the United States since 1970. And since 1970, we call neoliberal economic system. It was a system that was developed by Milton Friedman, who won a Nobel Prize in the Chicago School of Economics. And it's also called Reaganomics, if people know, or Thatcher, They introduced a new form of unregulated free market capitalism, which also destroyed the labor union and which also increased the inequality between rich and poor. And since then, in every measure, especially in the United States and other countries who blindly followed it, you are seeing decline actually in human progress. And this again is one of the graphs. You can see United States has one of the lowest coverage, health insurance coverage in all the rich and the developed world. And I'm just going to go and show you the oppression. I started with Muslim, but let's talk about US military expenditure. United States, when we are saying we don't have money for healthcare, that's what the US government says. We don't have enough money for healthcare, right? Then how come US has money to spend on military expenditure, which is more than the next 9 countries combined? And this is the real core of the problem, because the suffering that people are, working class oppressed people are suffering in America, is because the United States is spending much more on military than universal health care. And this shows that if that 768 billion was spent on human welfare, you're gonna universal and child care, 12 weeks national paid family and medical leave, homes for all, dental, hearing, and vision Medicare, tuition-free public universities, publicly owned broadband, and 100% renewable energy in the US by 2050. And I'm just adding that because oftentimes when we are organizing, people say, don't talk about war or Palestine, let's talk about local issues. And what we are saying, actually, nothing is local, everything is local in a way, because when US is spending so much money on war, it also means USA is doing war on the poor people in the country. And that word first time was articulated by Martin Luther King in 1967. He made a famous speech beyond Vietnam, and he talked about triple evils of materialism, racism, and imperialism. And at that time, Vietnam War. That all the money that USA is pumping in the Vietnam War is actually bankrupting the black and poor people in the United States. Similarly, for USA, since 1946 or in this graph about 70 years, USA paid $134 billion aid to Israel, which is the largest recipient of USAID. And the cost of USAID per minute to Israel could almost cover 1 year of health care for an American adult or 2 years of a child. Brother Dallas Ali comes to Palestine rallies and has a band here. So we really have to understand that when we are protesting against it, it is not that these are foreign issues, these are actually local issues. And one other thing I didn't get time to add slide, even the ammunition that USA uses in wars or gives to Israel, USA also uses against black people in the country. The same tear gas canister fired in West Bank, Gaza or West Bank or Gaza was also fired against Black Lives Matter protesters in Ferguson, Missouri. This is a very important Institute of Policy Studies who do a really good analysis of on progressive issues. And they said that Medicare, that if you divert $350 billion from military, the USA can give Medicare for all. And oftentimes in the discussions of presidential campaigns, they say we don't have money. Well, we have money if we stop funding $350 billion on military every year. And now, continuing, US shutting down doors to refugees, immigrants and refugees. I work with a lot of refugees and our friends work with them. And this graph shows you, and this 2020, this is ceiling how much US admitted refugees. And in 2020 is the lowest ceiling, is our Trump time. And ceiling is what USA has put a policy, and that is it should be compared with actual admission. So the blue is the ceiling, and the orange